right, season three. Season three just recently concluded. So I'm here to talk about it. I'll read here the plot here on IMDb in case you guys haven't seen this, but this is the plot of the overall series, not necessarily season three. A widely talented girls' high school soccer team become the unlucky survivors of a plane crash deep in the Canadian wilderness. Okay, doesn't say too much there, but I know I did a review for I sometimes don't remember or whatever, don't even bother to look it up, but I know I did a review kind of combining seasons 1 and 2 because I was a little late to the party on this one, but got to binge those 2 seasons together. So I was happy to finally see season 3. It seemed like it took forever to get here. I don't want to rehash the whole thing. If you guys can search for that review, if you're looking for a review of the first 2 seasons, hopefully if you're watching this, you've seen season 3 or curious about season 3. Because I'm going to be talking about season 3 and that kind of overlaps everything that's happened in season 1 and 2. I'm not going to guarantee that I'm always spoiler free with anything here, including what's happened here in season 3. I'm going to try not to or try to give away too much or anything super important, but I'm not going to make any promises this time because it might be just really hard to kind of talk about without maybe saying certain things that we already know or don't know or expect, whatever. Anyway, this is not going to be spoiler free. I'll just put that out there, even though I'll try, but I'm not going to guarantee anything. Anyway, kind of going through the series, obviously really loved season 1 and kind of the setup there, and then kind of diving into a lot of what the girls kind of went through in the plane crash. And it is definitely a two-sided world when you're watching the show. Obviously the crash and their survival, and then them years later. And being the horror fan in me, even though there are some stuff that happens in the current time, the true horror is what happens in the woods. So I'm always more interested in that and tailored to that and what's going on there. So as they spend time in the current time, sometimes it's kind of like yeah, to be honest. And that's kind of just been the way it's gone as the series has kind of gone on. Like I said, when it started, it was a lot about what, the crash and them, kind of gathering themselves in the forest and figuring that out, which was really interesting. Then, as season 2 kind of rolled on, while of course it does, go back and forth, a lot of it was tailored to the certain group of the girls that had, the women now who have, kind of come together and then kind of got mixed up in their own thing. And then, one of the characters ends up dying at the end of season 2, which is a real shame. And because, I thought, those the two characters in specific, and I remember talking about that in the review, had such a great relationship and were great on camera together, two really well-known actresses, and they were just fabulous together. And then to have one just kind of die off was kind of a huge letdown, just being honest. So, I know, going on, Christina Ricci in this thing, she's, she just, I can't say enough about her character here. She's by far, probably my favorite character. Just crazy, weird, and just everything she does is just so well timed within what's going on. But even her younger self, is all right. She's a little weird, and maybe at times maybe you don't like her then. But Christina Ricci in this thing is just great. I can just say that. And I'll be, honest for myself with her as an actress. There's other stuff obviously we know that she's done. I'm never gonna say that I've always been the hugest fan of hers. Good actress, but me personally, never been the hugest fan. But this role and doing this, and even I remember when I started watching season one and when they first kind of showed her, I was like, she looks awfully familiar, but I'm not really sure who she was. And then all of a sudden, when you kind of I don't remember if I figured it out or I searched it first, but I'm like, oh my God, that's her. And then, she's been just really great. But, the acting is not really, an issue here. I think, whether it's the young ones or the older versions of them, whoever's playing the roles, the acting is not, the issue here. To me, it's just kind of where it's going in season 3. Obviously, you have one character here, Shauna. She's, really, you kind of see it coming from the other seasons, but, you get into it in season 3, and she really puts that foot forward as, maybe not the first one who was affected by what went on in the forest. Obviously, you have, a couple of the other ones out there who kind of really get into the whole nature and spirit, and there's something out there, and kind of get that ball rolling. But then, she really kind of takes it in season 3, in the parts we see young Shauna. And then, they kind of release that a little bit more here in season 3 in the older version, her adult version here. And, she even does something really dramatic when she gets in a fight with another woman. She kind of reverts back to those animal instincts. And I think, as far as the adult versions of them, that probably was one of the more interesting things that happened in season 3, is you do see, one or two of the characters, kind of, or maybe even more, kind of really revert back or have those moments where they get to those real animal instincts that you see them kind of definitely explore in their young versions, being out in the forest there. It's going to pop up, and again, they kind of done that, a little bit in season 1, definitely in season 2. But I think now, even season 2, you kind of were still kind of in that mystery kind of stage and whatever. But I think now, you see it in an instant where it was not really necessary, but they resorted to it. Shauna biting somebody. The one does. We have another important death. We actually have a couple of important deaths. But when one person dies, another one buries and does a pretty crazy thing in itself. Kind of leaving that as spoiler territory there out. But you see, that is all of the wilderness or whatever the it is or whatever the nature thing is that's going on here really come out in these women. And it's, it is obviously the horror part of the show and the more interesting part of the show. But there's just, I don't know, as it kind of goes, there's other times where I'm just like, especially in the adult thing, where I'm just not as interested, or just like, they kind of tailor it as and it kind of almost starts leading from Christina Ricci's character is that there's Misty, is that there's this, some mystery to kind of be solved. And that's fine, but then other times, it just seems like it's filling time and space. I think in season 3 we spend a lot of, there's some unnecessary moments, I think, with Shauna's daughter and her husband, and they're buying time in a hotel room. There's one time where they're smoking weed in a room, and you're trying to build relationships and show things and maybe stuff like that, but I don't know, I'm just not really interested in that kind of thing, and just think that they're wasting my time by showing that. I think by the time you end season 3, obviously, you find out that there's a possibility of Shauna's daughter playing a bigger role in everything, or there's some importance to her, which is fine. But I think all this other stuff, that we kind of have to go through to get to that point, maybe is just not needed. I would rather see other things. I'd rather see them running around and doing more crazy stuff in the forest as opposed to that. Um, and I don't know what the final product is, where they're going with that storyline. We'll see. But the fact that she's not out there in the forest, she's not one of the survivalists. I don't know that keeps me, as hooked. Obviously, it plays a little bit of a role with Shauna because she did miscarry while she was out there. So, there's that. I'm kind of interested in more. They really haven't kind of gone through it and told us kind of maybe who all the survivors are, because you don't really know. The core group that we've been seeing, for now through 3 seasons. You do find out somebody else is alive here in this season, and they play a little bit of a role with what's happening. So, as kind of season 3 rolls out, they're also under the assumption that somebody's trying to do something to them, or Shauna is at least thinking that somebody's doing something to her and her family and whatever. And, it ends up maybe being true, maybe not, or kind of maybe down the middle. But again, that leads to the fact is that we don't know, everybody who's maybe survived yet. So, are they out there? What role do they have? Do they have a role in what's happening with them in their adult life so far? Or is it just a coincidence? Or are they going to play a role later down the way? Like I said, I think, when season 3 ends, it kind of leads off, obviously Shauna's daughter is going to be important. I think, the couple there, one of them dies. So I think that, we might see an unleashing of maybe the bad side of her to come in the future. I don't know. We'll see. They kind of play that off. So I think, one of the interesting things there is that, you have, I think it was Lottie, who, she's maybe the first one to kind of feel this bizarreness in the forest. And then I think it was Tessa, I think, or Thaisa, is the other one that kind of has this other kind of side to her that we kind of see. And, what is she going to embrace that bad, more evil part, going forward? Is that going to be a thing? So, I think in the present day, if they can get to maybe more of their animal instincts, nature thing, whatever, I would appreciate it more. Otherwise it's just being carried by Christina Ricci and her craziness. It's really maybe not, and I know that, season 3 really pushes Shauna both in the current and in the past to the forefront. And I think even her adultness, her adult side of it, is a little bit where the story kind of started as far as the adult side of the show. And it kind of starts a little bit there. But you really see why in season 3, the show kind of really tailors towards her first and foremost, as she kind of takes the lead in the survivalness and is a little bit crazy. But then I think, as it kind of goes on, they almost started off as, you want to root for her, even though she's a little bit crazy. But I think by the time season 3 concludes, you're definitely probably not really liking her in the past. And, they try to make you sympathize with her in the adult world here later, but, not really liking her there neither anyway. So, I don't know, what her ultimate fate will be. Obviously she survived the whole thing. But as far as where we go in the adult side, if, she eventually dies, I'm not going to be crying over it unless we find out something else about her. Obviously she has her reasons for kind of maybe being the way she is. But still, she's just way too harsh, I guess, and so forth. I would say they again, I did appreciate what happened in the past in their survival mode. They do run into, you kind of see them and they're almost not really doing a whole lot much more than surviving. But, then there's an incident with the coach, and that becomes very interesting. And if you're looking for horror in the show, that ends up being a very good horror thing that goes on with him. And then later they run into a bunch of survivors, not survivors, people who are three people who are, I guess, exploring the forest looking for frogs or something like that. And that ends up being, an interesting moment. And kind of when that happens again, if you haven't seen it, I just spoiled something, a big moment that maybe you weren't expecting. But that, kind of you think, okay, well, this is going to open the door for them to escape, and then it kind of doesn't, and then it kind of does, and it kind of goes back and forth. They do twist and turn it there. There's a couple of unexpected things that happen. Again, we go horror direction. If you're in it for the horror, blood and guts and that kind of thing, there's a couple of good moments involved with that as well. So that's fun. So again, I'm really liking what's going on in the wilderness and the craziness. Again, I'm not 100% sold in the whole, it and the nature and, the witchcraft or whatever the hell it is that's going on there. That's maybe not necessarily my thing, but, whatever, if it's causing them to be nuts and causing other horror stuff to happen, I'll deal with it. So there, definitely they end up doing another hunt at the end of season 3. A little sad, but again, brings out more horror, so, why not? Fun stuff, blood and guts, and that kind of thing. Let's eat and have a good time. I'm not going to say it because, I think that would be, the ultimate way to spoil everything and spoil it if you have not seen season 3. Definitely ends up with a nice little twist and kind of, leads you to something, as it should, to really look forward to when season 4 starts. I don't know if I'm just assuming it or maybe I read it. I would assume the route traveled here is 5 seasons. And I would hope that, with the way this storyline is and where it's going and kind of how they have it set up here, that they, as much as you may, if you like the show, obviously when you like the show, you hope it goes on and has season after season. But I think just because of the way it's kind of set up, you hope that they tailor their limits here and make it make sense, and not just continue to add stupid stuff to kind of drag it on. I think that might have been something that happened to Lost, where I think they always said they knew where the show was going to end, but it to me it seemed like they got lost along the way there, and it just seemed to drag out longer than it should have. So I think that this kind of opens the door to maybe we've kind of went up the hill now, and now we can maybe start to turn that corner and kind of maybe start exploring how these women, the ones that survive, and how they got to this direction. Because even with whenever they survived or whenever they had, made it back, when the show starts, obviously there's a huge time gap there between, when their adult life picks up. So, how much of that is going to be filled in, how much are we going to see, how much are they going to dive into, and so forth. But I hope the way that this ended and so forth kind of starts to swing us in that direction, because again, I'm afraid, if the way they ended it comes of nothing, and then they're really going to start pushing, them being out there for an even longer period of time, and then that means you have to extend out what's happening in their adulthood a long time, and I'm already kind of on the edge of I don't know how much more other stuff or where they can go that's going to keep my interest. Like I said, to me the show started really high and is, not that it's bad, not that it's terrible, but it's kind of come down a notch each time. And kind of led particularly more by, again, I said the adult side of it, the Stranded in the Forest side to me is always interesting, because they're always doing wild stuff and so forth. and super aggressive with each other and all the craziness. But I'm just not sure. I don't want them to go and drag it on forever and just become a complete waste of time in the end of what something started really good. So what I don't know what else to say. Particularly I've kind of gone through what happened in season 3, not really said a whole lot of other stuff, but again, I don't know what you guys are looking for when you're watching it. Are you into the characters? Are you into stuff that happened in the past? And then what's going on kind of in the future? Like I said, they kind of set up a little mystery, but I think that sometimes, when they set up these mysteries that are supposed to, they kind of stumble along the way. I certainly think that, like I said, there's, I believe, two important deaths in season 3, at least on the adult side of it, and that's gonna, I would hope that that kind of springs forward something even better to happen in season 4, and we'll see. I'm not, I'm not gonna say that I'm totally sold again on the whole Shauna's daughter kind of angle. Again, I don't know what they have planned. Maybe they make it really interesting. But as of it stands right now, I'm like, I'm not, hugely excited about that. Obviously, we'll see what happens with Shauna. She obviously needs to take a chill pill, both in the past and the future. But whatever, I don't see that happening anytime soon. But we'll see. So, while I did say that I did remember doing a season 1 and 2 review, I don't remember what I gave the score on that. I'm going to give this one 3 pools of blood. Again, leaning largely for the fun stuff that happened in the wilderness and the deaths and that kind of stuff, and maybe even a wild scene or two in the adult side of it, where Shauna takes a bite out of crime, and maybe there's I think the other person who dies, that was kind of a shocking moment, even though I probably spoiled that for you if you haven't seen it. But those couple of shocks were okay. But again, I would kind of subtract maybe some other things that maybe to me they just don't seem important in the whole thing, and more of time, just taking up time. But maybe it'll be more important at the end. I don't know. But yeah, I would say I'm still in favor. I still will watch season 4 whenever that comes around. We'll probably have to wait forever now. They don't produce these shows fast enough anymore. But to me, again, it kind of started off really high and it's just kind of ticked itself. It hasn't made a big drop, but it's kind of come down a little bit. And we'll see. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. I still enjoy the show and everything. Still seems to be a decent rating here on IMDb. I don't know what the show ratings are overall, but I didn't see a lot of talk from you guys like on social media or whatever about it. So I don't know if it's just you don't have access to it or just people didn't talk about it for whatever reason. I don't know. But we'll see where it goes. So I'm going to stick with 3 pools of blood. I am hoping that I gave season 1 and 2 a little bit higher than that, so it makes sense. But yeah, that's it for this this talk about season 3 and so forth. So with that, horrorsquadreviews.blogspot.com is where you can find all my reviews written in video. Certainly, tons of video reviews for a while now, so you can like and subscribe and do everything else that everybody wants to do here on YouTube. If not, no worries, it is okay. I thank you for your time regardless. Twitter, Facebook, information down below, so you can reach out there. If you do want to talk about season 3 there, that's fine, reach out. And definitely in the comment section again, your thoughts on season 3, your thoughts on the whole series, where it stands and so forth. Feel free to mention it there as well. So with that, I'll catch you on the next review, horror fans.